And peace, saints of St. John's. My name is Ryan Curry. I serve as the canon for Common Mission on the staff of our bishop, Bishop Ruth, who sends her blessings and greetings to you this morning. It's a real pleasure and privilege to be back among you, and I'm very grateful to Canon Walpole for this invitation. Once upon a time, in a far-off land, well, let's see, how about Walterboro? There was a well-known Sunday school teacher, Mrs. Edie Blevins. Way back in the 20th century, her father had been the town preacher, and her mother had edited the church cookbook. It was said of the young Miss Edie before her marriage to Dr. Blevins that no one before her had ever been both spelling bee champion and captain of the women's basketball team at the same time. But it was her long career as a Christian educator, a mentor and guide to generations of dutiful young Walterborans that had sealed her reputation as one of the town's leading saints and citizens. Well, one Sunday morning, Miss Edie woke up on the wrong side of the bed. Her devoted beagle Buford was baying at some unknown quarry, so she got up. She stared coldly into the vanity as she put on yet another useless cream. She winced as she stepped into her pointy shoes. Dr. Blevins had made the coffee before he left for his morning walk, but of course he left the pot on the counter rather than putting it back in the Mr. Coffee for the 1000th time. But no matter. With a glance in the hall mirror, Miss Edie smoothed her jacket, put on her gloves, and sallied forth to her God-given duty. Later, after teaching the young people about King Solomon's construction of the temple, Miss Edie was stirring sweet and low into her iced tea at Kelly's restaurant. The waiter, whom she kept calling Matthew, even though that was actually his older brother's name, was saying something about a scholarship opportunity, science Olympiad, community service award. Meanwhile, Dawn from the Humane Society wandered by selling tickets for the barbecue fundraiser. Miss Edie sipped her tea. The color drained from her face. All sugar. Not what she'd ordered. Now only amplified by the sweet and low. Well, you could always buy a dozen tickets, Miss Edie, and give them out to the people at church, said Dawn. The waiter, who was not Matthew, brought out the soup, finally. No, dear, 4 will do, said Miss Edie. As Dawn dejectedly moved on to the next table, and as not Matthew returned to the kitchen, and as Dr. Blevins returned to his newspaper, Miss Edie finally set about eating her soup. Just a dash more black pepper, and then that first spoonful of warm, comforting nourishment she raised to her lips, only to find, with a furious clattering smack of her hand on that crowded table that was heard all round Colleton County and drew stares from every corner in the room, that the soup was cold. Ice cold, she exclaimed at the onlookers. Ice cold. Matthew, well, to be precise, Matthew's little brother George, he crumpled. Dawn's eyes were as big as saucers. Dr. Blevins furrowed his brow. Come, Tom, we're leaving, said Miss Edie. And with that, first tins, and then as news trickled out about this incident at Kelly's restaurant, hundreds, and then perhaps as many as 2,000 weary and anxious, overburdened souls former pupils of Walterborough's most prominent Sunday school class, had little passing crises of faith. That Tuesday evening, the pastor called on the Blevins, and a proposal was agreed to that perhaps it was best if one of the working age women of the congregation might be called upon to take the Sunday school class. It was felt not by all, but by some, that perhaps Miss Edie should take a vacation. Well, people of St. John's, I do have a little confession to make. Miss Edie is completely made up, in case you hadn't realized that. A composite of teachers I had, relatives, all of blessed memory, I assure you, and a composite of my own self as the author, of course. But I would bet that many of you have felt the way that Miss Edie felt that Sunday morning, beset upon by endless little stresses, little annoyances, little assaults on the spirit. Sometimes life feels like playing a banjo that just won't stay quite in tune, or like coaching an offense that just can't quite hold a lead. Go Gamecocks. And these, of course, are just the little things. Just the little things. Ignore for a moment the great evils and failures of the world. Ignore the car crashes and the market crashes, the wars and rumors of wars, the plagues. Ignore poverty. Ignore famine. Especially in times of personal troubles, it's easy to ignore such things for a moment. But moments of stress, big and small, tend to pile up. Troubles accrue, and by the same sort of mechanism as compound interest, seem to do so exponentially. For all we know, it wasn't Miss Edie's cold soup that broke the camel's proverbial back that day, but any number of other experiences that led up to it. Health scares, bereavements, regrets, uncertainties. Now, I've lived here for, I guess, about 6 years now, and my impression of most Carolinians is that they have a keen sense of history, not just its well-known climaxes, but all the nuances and gradations, how the little detail fits into the larger scene. The Reverend Phillips Brooks was perhaps America's best known and best loved preacher of the 19th century. An Episcopalian of old Boston stock, he was a priest in Philadelphia during the Civil War. As the conflict carried on, he plunged faithfully into the work of a wartime pastor. But overburdened and tired, and perhaps as some suggested Miss Edie ought to do, he decided at the war's end, after eulogizing Lincoln, after memorializing the fallen members of his flock, that he should perhaps take the vacation that he'd longed for since he was a child. And so he went to the Holy Land in 1865 and 1866. That Christmas time, he went with his companions to Bethlehem. And before worshiping that Christmas Eve night in the Church of the Nativity, there on the site of Jesus' birth, Brooks rode through fields where, as he would write home in a letter, shepherds watched their flocks then much the same way as they had all those many centuries ago. It was from that vantage point, from those fields looking down on the sleeping village of Bethlehem, that he was inspired to write the famous Christmas hymn, O Little Town of Bethlehem. It's that final line of the first stanza that always grabs me. The hopes and fears of all the years are met in thee tonight. In another carol, no doubt also inspired by that trip, Brooks wrote, "The earth has grown old with its burden of care." In my experience, most believers are caring people. Now, whether that's because God or a grandparent or a parent or perhaps a Sunday school teacher told them they ought to be, or whether experience has taught them the decisive impact that kindness and consideration and generosity can make in times of anxiety, believers care about the people in their lives and their communities. But that does not mean that caring is not sometimes a burden, as Brooks says. And I think by some mystic confluence, it's the moment of Christmas and this season of expectation and preparation we call Advent that shows the burden of care in such high relief. Deep in our societal DNA, we know that care is more needful at this time of year than any other part of the year. It's now when people dig deepest into their pockets to contribute to local food banks and gift drives. It's now when, in spite of all that's going on, choirs and organists work on special musical contributions. It's now when homeowners tip their mail carriers, when travelers with compassionate eyes let the harried skip ahead in the security line to make their flight. It's now when the estranged think about calling home. It's now when war is put away for a moment and meals are shared, sometimes even across enemy lines. The hopes and fears of all the years meet now once a year, every year, since the fullest expression of care ever known was born to overburdened parents in an overburdened world. I suppose this is something to do with why music is so integral to this season. We need music to refresh our spirits. I discovered a new favorite poem for this year's Advent by Eugene Walter, the late poet laureate of my hometown of Mobile, Alabama. The poem is called "The Birth of Music." This is a little bit of it. Praying for rain, hoping for an end to war, begging the souffle not to fall. All urgencies twinging in the lower torso, anxieties ache in the groin, railing at time and distance, pushes to the hoped-for end. Foxfire burning in the night, the air aswarm with warlocks. So song, why song, being love on anxiety grafted, song will blossom on the tree of pain. Last week, I attended the Festival of Advent Lessons and Carols at my beloved alma mater, Sewanee. Before the service, I ran into some old friends, Scott and Jane, who had been with me in the university choir many years ago, 15 years ago, but who's counting? Scott and Jane now have an 18-month-old daughter named Isla, who is attending such a service full of candlelit solemnity for the first time. A couple of the carols that the choir sang had especially pronounced rhythms, led by a solitary drummer. The first was Gaudete, the rollicking medieval carol whose title means rejoice. The other was Comfort, Comfort Ye My People, a marching song for the faithful traveling toward Zion. And the drumbeat marked the time as choir and brass and drums sounded forth. For a moment, the 1,000 wearied, harried, overburdened, anxious hearts in that chapel beat with one pulse. And from the back of the nave where Isla was being tended by her parents, an infant voice penetrated the reverent silence as the music echoed away. Yay! Yay, the tiny voice said, and a room full of faithful, caring souls quietly laughed in affirmation. The Apostle James wrote to the faithful that we should be patient and that we shouldn't grumble while we await the coming of the Lord. Now, Miss Edie, wherever you are, with all love in my heart, I hope you hear this. Now is the time to trade your caring, burdened, anxious grumbling for song, and perhaps even for a little bit of prophetic laughter.